background to the sequence of events here that maybe show you why my views are what they are. My background is as a developer and programming computers. I moved into Agile, scaled Agile frameworks, Scrum, Kanban, these type of things. And so then there was programming orgs. And DAOs, suddenly this, sucked me in because it's programmable organizations. We attempt to program orgs outside of DAOs, but fundamentally it's not effective, okay? Okay, so this is going to be the layout. I'm going to talk about the context here, which is a controversy, a concept, which is the main drive of this talk, the transformation, how you can apply that concept, I think, in productive ways, and then some final thoughts. First up, the controversy. Earlier this year, I put out a mirror post called Protocol First DAO Strategy, which spoke very negatively about kind of the community first cult. I don't know what else to call it, right? And so I said, hey, there's actually alternative approaches to this. One is a community first, which is you gather to build, you get everyone to buy in on some mission, and then you use that money to build something. And the other is a protocol first, which is you build to gather. You actually build something of value, and decentralization suddenly has a relevance because no one's trying to capture your thing that has no value. You have decentralization to prevent capture because there's something of value to steal. And my rationale here was like, look at the biggest DAOs. Look at the chains, the L1s, L2s. They have a business model. They have something that creates value outside of any kind of DAO construct. Same thing. Line up the top, the biggest DAOs on Deep DAO and whatever, and most of them are DeFi. And so there's a product there. Also, this idea of protocol first or value first, it coheres with an agile mindset, which is you kind of put out something small and you validate it in the market, and then you kick off these iterations of improvement. And then lastly, the observation was decentralized systems are not designed by a committee. There were not hundreds of people voting on the pull requests in designing these like cryptographic incentive mechanisms. Typically, it's very small teams of PhDs and stuff who design these things. And so the whole point here was the importance of building value-generating protocols. This is the imagery that described what I thought was the correct approach. You have a core protocol. That core protocol has value. It can seed a community. That community can interact with that protocol via limited parameterized governance, and also add additional revenue streams. There's an expansion pack to this. It's progressive decentralization. Now, the big question that came out of this is people said, well, what if we're not a protocol DAO? What are we don't matter? Like, are we not relevant? And that's what I want to touch on here in this talk. So, social DAOs or tokenized communities. The definition, and Jihad has gone deep in this from Forefront. I love that he's defined these tokenized communities. I think it's like 7 properties. The shortened version is this. There's a shared token, a vision, or a shared token, shared vision, shared leadership. I love tokenized communities. I think they're awesome, okay? The type of activities they engage in, open-ended activities ranging from education, events, content creation, grants. And if we kind of use Snapshot as a proxy for how many tokenized communities there are, there's a hell of a lot. This is really old data, and this is like 20,000 spaces of tokenized communities with 130 proposals. So you cannot discount this as a phenomenon. Now, if we think about what a protocol is, ultimately a protocol is an on-chain market or platform. There's a supply and demand on both sides. Users and validators, traders and LP providers, borrowers and lenders. But we have a clue that there may be a different kind of protocol that breaks out of this mold in the form of nouns. I'm sure everyone in this room knows what nouns is, right? What's interesting about this is it takes an activity where there's not an explicit supply and demand, but it's a activity that runs every 24 hours with definite incentives that you could consider a kind of unstoppability to it. And so my statement here is that we say, hey, our tokenized communities, are they not relevant on protocol first? I would say we're lacking in imagination. And we can take the idea of nouns and push it even further. So this brings us to the concept. That was all an introduction, okay? This is the idea. The idea is social protocols. And this is where the light bulb started going off for me when thinking about this idea that any systematic, repeatable process is amendable to protocolization. And if social DAOs, if social DAO's community is the product, then we are responsible to codify its structures and processes to protect and improve it. And we see something interesting in the realm of psychology in the form of this script theory. And it basically says, instead of humans walking around with these abstract notions of what's true and right and all this stuff, really what we do is we have certain things we want. We want like food, we want notoriety, we want whatever, Maslow's hierarchy. And we kind of learn scripts on how to get that. And the simplest reason, think about this, you go into a restaurant. You're not really trying to figure out how to get food when you walk in this building. You have a script. And the script may even be specific to a culture of, yeah, I'm gonna say this, they're gonna say this. And so much of human behavior comes down to this. The restaurant, the doctor's appointment, the birthday party of these scripts, these kind of protocols. And so this is this idea of social protocols. And so can we apply this to tokenized communities? Because ultimately what we wanna do is we wanna go from what's on the left to what's on the right, okay? One thing I'll point out that's really interesting is if there were ever traffic lights and some social protocol set up on the left and it failed, you would still never get that. Because people would still naturally kind of be trained to interact in a certain way, okay? So this is where we get to the meat of this. I want to give you 4 steps and what I think are a real interesting start to take a tokenized community, a social DAO, and to transform it into a social protocol. Now, the coolest part about all this is this takes us back into incentive design, mechanism design, and unstoppability. Right now, if your social DAO basically is a Discord server, you're like one filing away from the whole thing getting nuked, you know? Okay, so the first step I would say is a handbook. Doesn't sound real sexy, but hear me out. You can call this constitution, a handbook, a manual. What's important here is that you're taking that which is implicitly understood and you're making it code in a sense. You're creating a canonical description of the structure and processes, possibly even ideally with governance around the editorial process. This is, you come into some chaotic, paperwork-driven business, and you say, hey, you need to digitize all this. You don't immediately start optimizing. You say, how does this work right now? We'll move it into source control, and then we'll start making changes iteratively. So this provides a basis for precise discussion. And if for anyone who's familiar, you have to be, of the scaling trust in DAOs, the whole distinction between the socialware and trustware, the social contracts and actual smart contracts, I would say this handbook is the step between them. It's the middle ground, okay? And there's also awesome project from MetaGov on everyone who's done like constitutional type stuff for DAOs. So the first step, moving into source control. Here's the Constitution. The second step is to define a cycle time. You'll see we're inching little by little into evolutionary algorithms, mechanism design. And so the cycle time determines the cadence, the pulse. Ultimately, the value is to introduce an inspect and adapt loop into your organization, your community. And this is not novel. It's a fundamental trait of token engineering. I stole this from the Trent McLaughlin from the Ocean Protocol when he shows this. This is like the first paper on like token engineering he put out, where he shows the parallels between token engineering and evolutionary algorithms. This cycle could be something like a season. DAO's are already halfway there. If your DAO already has a constitution with exactly the roles, the properties, the rules, how the whole thing works, and you're already operating in seasons, you literally are already doing these. Maybe you could do them more intentionally and self-consciously. The idea here is you can capture the learnings and make small changes to improve the outcome with every iteration. This is even basic for business. You know, what do our metrics look like with every cycle? What are we trying to optimize? Okay, so that's step 2. Step 3 is a little different. Introduce phases into the cycle time. Now, this is important because ideally when someone comes into your community, you want some behaviors to happen. You want a leveling. They shouldn't just come in and do nothing and not change and nothing gets accomplished, and then 3 months later they're like, hey, okay, that was cool. There's some idea, some design. And we can take from the game of chess this idea of phases. In the game of chess, strategy is broken out into 3 segments. There's an opening game, middle game, end game. And they're specific. They have certain assumptions. Again, we can draw from already like what a lot of DAOs think in terms of say, hey, out the gate, let's define onboarding, leveling, and then building. Maybe some grants process that happens at the end. This can change over time, and it can even expand. You could say, well, we have like a core contributor idea, persona, as a part of our contributor funnel. Maybe we add that later and change it, right? So that's first 3 steps. Now we get into the fun part. The 4th step is to componentize. The idea here is to take each of those phases and to codify them into mechanisms with these kind of desired properties: modular, unbundled, self-sustaining, optimized for their purpose, and cumulative. That is, there should be some value generated with them independently that feeds into the next stage. And you can see something here. It's like, oh, we have an onboarding module that works in a certain type of way that leads into, you know, a different kind of leveling module, education or something like this. And maybe we want to try something in parallel that works slightly different. So we're reintroducing a engineering mindset, smart contract design into this tokenized community. And then also you can heavily draw from lean thinkers, and lean thinkers way before any kind of Web3 type stuff. They have a lot of stuff talking about like waiting to the last possible responsible moment to make decisions, so preserving options, doing things in different ways, and using those results to kind of Darwinize each other out. The optimum solution is the one you land on. So few examples, makes it a little more concrete. So for instance, Nouns DAO would be maybe an onboarding mechanism, an onboarding game. It's an auction. How do you optimize the onboarding? I know people talk about Nouns as like, oh, it's the ultimate way to DAO. I think it's a breakout, but not a comprehensive pattern. Many DAOs, I think, would greatly benefit via auction onboarding, so that maybe the price of onboarding into that organization goes up as the value of the organization, the value of the network goes up. And so this could be one of the components. The next piece, an educational component, right? A lot of these diagrams were made in machinations. And I know it's kind of hard to see. It's not real bright in here. And you'd have to sit here and like look very closely to kind of see the details. The point is to describe how it can happen and how as soon as you isolate the problem, suddenly you get very specific optimizations of sustainability. So for instance, this one, a student comes in and anyone can be a teacher and charge a fee for their teaching. Reputation is issued both to the teacher and the student for that interaction, and certain fees accumulate to the teacher who's providing it, a treasury fee and the protocol fee. Anyone can kick off their own kind of educational module, and then there's a core team that kind of builds out this protocol. Another example of an education module. Grants, a grants module. You know, it's funny, so much of DAOing, it revolves around this idea of giving grants, but then you have to ask, like, what does a good grants program look like? How do we measure return? And this is one example I came up with where you turn your grants program into a prediction market. And if you're voting no on everything, and everything you're the minority, and those grants are still given, and those projects don't turn out to be anything, you actually get upside, right? So you create a game of deciding who to give grants to. So another module that could play a part here, right? So you'll see a pattern here with this, social protocols. And this is happening in the real world with traditional businesses. If you look at platform designers that are not doing anything in Web3, they'll say, we're seeing the unbundling of the firm. That is, why would I, as a big business, totally internalize HR, benefits, all this kind of stuff when I can outsource it to extremely small specialized groups to do that? So that's considered the unbundling, right? And in the same way, for a tokenized community, you're decomposing the different activities of the DAO, optimizing them specifically, and then recomposing them. Then there's the rebundling. And so this is an example of where I think we want to pursue this kind of engineering rigor with these designs, even with communities, where it's like a cloud architecture where you can say, hey, this is where it starts, here's where the value accrues. You have dedicated teams working decoupled to optimize these different modules. With the fundamental assumption that community is not at odds with design, it's supported and protected by it. And you can check out my Games Over Governance if you want to look at more why I think the game of DAOs is not deciding what to do. Actually, if we boil that down, that's called bureaucracy. It's actually doing something of value or protecting something of value. So that's the background, the idea, and the multi-step kind of idea on how it could be adopted. And then lastly, I'll do some final thoughts on the risk and kind of a call to arms. So the big risk of not doing this, and it's not happening, I don't think, is that DAOs are taking their freedom for granted. Good culture is not a defense against capture, I don't think. And we neglect these things to our own peril. What are the big dangers? The first is burnout. If you have a core team that's running the whole show behind the curtain, eventually they're tired and can't maintain. And what happens? One person, 2 people, 3, 5 people leave your DAO and the whole thing is shut down. Maybe we've lost the meaning of DAO at that point, right? The second is capture. The capture could be internal. Maybe those people are awesome. They want to continue running the DAO and they have no interest in passing the keys to anyone else because the upside is so great. And so you really end up with something that's a core team of unarticulated power dynamics that has been captured without anyone's knowledge. And the third is litigation. One disgruntled contributor. This is the real trip. A single contributor, not even the government stepping out, but a single contributor say, hey, these guys just trying to sidestep securities laws, they maybe even file, a complaint, and you're smoked, And so those are the big dangers. And so, if we value communities, if we're all like, this is the future, it's the new, if we remain stagnant and don't evolve as a community, it's irresponsible and it's the antithesis of the future visions that we're promoting, I'm all for the culture, but the tech is how we got here, and the tech has to undergird, protect, and advance that cultural revolution. And then lastly, this is the biggest. It's not about social DAOs. That's not it. I think it's about expanding our vision of what can be coded as mechanisms, as unstoppable patterns of human coordination that are beneficial to the participants. And if we're stuck in hey, the only way we know how to do that is DEXs and DeFi, then we're not going to the future, okay? We'll just have more kind of DEXs and DeFi, And so the other thing too is we talk about, I think many of us are here because we want to reprogram the world in beneficial ways. And we jump right to the end of we're building a nation state. I like a digital nation state, sounds awesome. But if we can't make small, self-sustainable, unstoppable businesses, organizations, then we're not doing the nation state thing. We have to iterate up to that. And so this is the place to start to do that. So we have to start thinking outside the box, I think. So that's it. I can be reached on Twitter, Singularity Hack. I work at Polygon Labs with Marco. We're trying to apply this stuff in what was Polygon DAO, now a Polygon Village. What does a grants-giving game look like that's self-sustaining, that doesn't just result in giving stuff out until it's gone and then having no plan after that? Like or just the next chain that launches that now gives everyone away tokens for public goods? What's the long-term self-sustained ecosystem design look like? So I'm super excited to be here, happy to meet and chat, and thanks for listening. Questions here? Okay. Hey.
Yeah, that's great. I think codifying programming what you can is like amazing. I think about that. Like just thinking practically, going through the 3 steps for the code. Like what are the size of your projects do you see when starting to codify? Like how long do you can spend doing these 3 steps? Like test and learn in a lead way before you codify, or do you codify what you can from the outset and least tweak beyond?
This is the part I think is so cool, right? Because if we come into a DAO and we're codifying the whole DAO, it's like, no, that doesn't work, right? What you can start with and say, okay, what's the first thing that's happening in this thing? Onboarding. And so who does it? What are their incentives? What's the mechanism here? And this is super low-hanging fruit. The pattern in a lot of DAOs is like one group gets paid to do some onboarding, and the onboarding sucks. But there's no mechanism for anyone else. So you say, hey, maybe there's several onboarding groups, and we change, people can petition to be another, and they actually get a cut of some compensation. So they're independently incentivized for the quality of onboarding. And then you can begin to codify this. There's no smart contracts. There's no code. It's just, what are the incentives? And then you can kind of inch up to something more sophisticated. And so I would say it's simpler than maybe what you described, in the sense you're only doing one piece, and you can start doing that piece just basically using your constitution. In the constitution, you can say, hey, we vote, onboarding groups get X% cut, and here's how we'll do it. We'll do it with the 0x splits. We'll put it up for a vote. People vote. The vote's directly related to a pull request. The pull request updates the constitution, and you start this process and this way of thinking.
So, just something you're saying, pick the piece that's most important to your project initially and focus time codifying that, even if it's not shared.
Yes.
And then slowly pick up.
Yeah, it could be. It depends on, if you're already like a DeFi protocol and you don't already have like rigorous incentive mechanism around that, probably need to start there, because that's the thing that's making money, right? But if you have that and you're like, okay, how do we model then the contributor experience and what type of people we want, then you can start there and ultimately start around like the customer. We call it different things. It's the user, it's the contributor, like who is the person that is driving this, and let's optimize their experience for their benefit. Yeah. Any other question?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, that was the best talk I've heard on now. I was like, no, it was the best. You did so awesome, man. So something you wrote about DAO theme captures. I'm really curious about how you envision codifying protection for DAO members against things like tribalism, bureaucracy. Is it even possible to eliminate human nature? And how do you envision that being codified or protecting?
I think any attempt to somehow think that incentive engineering is going to change human nature is starting on the wrong basis. We talk about Moloch a lot, but here's the thing. It's like the meme of the guy looking in the mirror and pointing. We are Moloch. Okay? And so I think it's actually better to start on the premise that everyone is 100% selfish and to design the incentive machine so that that benefits the whole. You see? It goes back to even the fundamental premise of private property, free trade, capitalism is that I don't need to have any goodwill towards you. I want your business, so I have to make better stuff. Better stuff. And so my self-interest benefits you because I have to make better stuff that's cheaper. Okay? And so it all comes back to the incentives. You know, no one's doing personality tests or ethics tests on Bitcoin validators. No one cares, you know. Can you hash faster than anybody else? And if we start on this basis, then I think we're started on some good level, you know.
Yes, on this, so you mentioned the prediction markets.
Yep.
So I'm thinking about seasonality.
Yes.
And my question is like, are there limits to that? And is it really possible to set up such a system that you show in the machinations?
You know, I would say that's definitely beyond the scope of what I'm prepared to answer or talk about now. As an example, I would say, let's try to measure the quality of anything that happens and is produced and design it into some sort of mechanism. And so if we're doing grants, how do we know we're doing it good? And let's build that into the system and maybe even incentivize contrarian views. And so could a grants program built into a prediction market, what would be the caveats? You could probably do a whole little mini conference on that question. So I couldn't answer that. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, thank you guys.